Now, it should be the simplest thing to say, that terror supporters are not welcome in our country. But the Prime Minister just can't say it. He can't say that terror supporters aren't welcome in Australia. Liberal MP Julian Leeser asked Albanese this question twice today in Parliament. Have a look.
Prime Minister, on October 7, Hamas terrorists went into small Israeli farming villages and a music festival, where they filmed themselves gleefully murdering children, raping women and mutilating their victims, including after death. 1,300 innocent people were gunned down and murdered for sport, and 251 hostages were forced at gunpoint into Hamas terror tunnels under Gaza. On return, thousands of people were dancing in the streets in celebration. Prime Minister, does supporting Hamas pass the character test for an Australian visa?
A simple answer. The Prime Minister just couldn't answer the question.
One of the things that some of the Jewish community leaders have said to me in the wake of October 7 is that they are precisely the sort of people who want to see peace and reconciliation with the Palestinians as well. There they were, very close to where the border was, and to have them subjected to the horrific murder, rape and abuse that occurred, the kidnapping of people is horrific if it occurred to any human being.
And the Speaker wouldn't even take a point of order, presumably to point out that the Prime Minister wasn't answering the question. So Julian Leeser got up and asked it again very specifically.
Prime Minister, does supporting Hamas pass the character test for an Australian visa?
Albanese would not answer. Well, after question time, Julian Leeser told me, "I don't understand why the Prime Minister cannot say what Australians expect a Prime Minister to say, that anyone who supports terrorist organisations like Hamas is not welcome here. It is very disappointing that he can't just say in simple words what John Howard or Bob Hawke would easily have said." And I can tell you that even Labor politicians are shocked that Albanese could not come out and say that anyone who supports terrorism isn't welcome in our country, that it would fail the character test requirement for a visa. Labor MPs are concerned, they're dismayed about Albanese's handling of this crucial issue that's fundamental to our very values and democracy. They have failed to understand why Albanese didn't come out straight after the ASIO Director General Mike Burgess's comments 2 Sundays ago, 10 days ago, and clarify that actually no, Hamas supporters, terrorist supporters, aren't welcome in Australia. The only explanation I can see is that Hamas supporters are welcome in Australia, like the head of ASIO said himself.
If it's just rhetorical support and they don't have an ideology or support for a violent extremism ideology, then that's not a problem.
And the reality is Hamas sympathisers have already come to Australia on visas issued by the Australian government. I showed that this had happened back in February. A 21-year-old Palestinian had liked and shared pro-Hamas content right after October 7, content that celebrated those terrorist attacks. Well, he's no longer in Gaza, he's now in Melbourne on an Albanese government visa. Today, the opposition leader Peter Dutton accused Albanese of dodging 30 questions relating to what he's now calling the Visas for Votes scheme.
Over the last 2 weeks, the Prime Minister has dodged about 30 questions on the government's handling of people coming from terrorist-controlled Gaza since October 7. It's now clear that by cutting corners and concocting the Visa for Votes scheme, this government has put domestic political considerations ahead of national security, and Australians are now less safe.
And not to get into too much detail about what went on in Parliament, but they actually made Peter Dutton remove the phrase Visa for Votes. That's not even allowed. Freedom of speech to call this Visa for Votes, that's not even allowed under the Labor government in Parliament. That is freedom of speech. Now, here were some of the questions that the Prime Minister refused to answer just today.
Will individuals currently in the terrorist-controlled Gaza war zone who have already been granted a visa by this government be subject to face-to-face interviews or biometric checks before they arrive in Australia?
How many people from the Gaza war zone has Qatar accepted?
I refer to the government's issuing of tourist visas to nearly 3,000 people from the terrorist-controlled Gaza war zone. Can the Prime Minister provide details on any concerns raised by the New South Wales State Police or the New South Wales Government regarding this matter?
Albanese calls all the questions about the visa process pointless noise, and he lectured Dutton about national security.
National security is too important to be used as a political football. Our national security is something that historically in this place, has been above the sort of game playing and targeting that we've seen here. The targeting of any group based upon hate is a bad thing, whether that's people of Jewish faith, people of Islamic faith. And what they don't want also is conflict brought here. They want Australia to play a constructive role.
Now, that is an extraordinary remark, that he doesn't want the conflict brought here, when the Prime Minister is literally handing out visas to thousands of people from a terrorist hotspot without proper, or in some cases, any security checks. There are also live questions about whether Tony Burke gave any ministerial or personal recommendations to overturn visa cancellations. His office simply won't answer the question. What's needed now is a thorough review of all the visas issued to ensure that recipients are genuine refugees and don't pose a security risk to our country. It's not good enough just to hope and pray a terror attack doesn't take place. Now, let me tell you, I've spoken to a lot of current and former political and law enforcement figures about what's unfolding here, what the government has done with this Gazan visa situation, and all of them that I've spoken to are universally horrified. Albanese is out of his depth. He is risking national security and he's putting community safety on the line. But this is what happens when you put a radical pro-Palestinian activist in charge of running the country.